Son, your idiot wife changed the PIN on her debit card. Now I can't even buy a new cabinet for my house. The mother-in-law shrieked into the phone to her precious son. Within 30 minutes, my husband burst into my office and started hitting me, demanding I tell him the new PIN code. But he had absolutely no idea what consequences awaited him. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and enjoy the story. Veronica never considered herself overly gullible. At 32, she was the marketing director of a large construction firm in Chicago, drove better than most men, and could assemble IKEA furniture faster than her husband could even find the instruction manual. Therefore, when she found a stranger's letter in her mailbox that morning, her first thought was simply to hand it to her neighbor. The letter was addressed to Nancy Miller, Veronica's mother-in-law. Apparently, the mail carrier had mixed up the apartment numbers in their older building. Veronica was already walking up the stairs to the third floor, where Nancy lived when the envelope partially flapped open. She absent-mindedly glanced at the contents and froze. In her hands was a medical certificate from a private clinic. The document stated that Nancy Miller was in perfect health and fully capable of performing heavy physical labor. The date on it was from yesterday. Yet, just the day before yesterday, her mother-in-law had complained about severe back pain and begged Andrew, Veronica's husband, to help her deep clean her apartment because she supposedly couldn't even lift a vacuum cleaner. Veronica slowly walked back down to her own apartment. Andrew had already left for work, leaving behind the smell of coffee and a pair of scattered socks. She sat at the kitchen island and carefully reread the medical report. All vitals were normal, spine healthy, heart working like a clock. Blood pressure absolutely perfect for a 60-year-old woman. That meant all this time, Nancy had simply been faking it. Veronica remembered how often she and Andrew had sacrificed their weekends to help his sick mother. How she had cooked special heart-healthy meals for her, bought expensive supplements, and canceled plans with her girlfriends because they urgently needed to drive over to Nancy's place. At the office, Veronica couldn't focus on her work. Her thoughts kept returning to the medical report, which she had carefully hidden in her purse. By lunchtime, she made a decision. She needed to test her suspicions. Veronica called her mother-in-law and, in her sweetest voice, asked about her health. "Oh, Ronnie, it's terrible. My back is acting up again. It must be the rain. I can't even lift the tea kettle. Maybe you should go to the doctor," Veronica suggested. What do those doctors know? They'll just say it's my age, tell me to take painkillers, and stop complaining. After the call, Veronica opened the document and read every line again. Nancy wasn't just healthy, she was in excellent physical shape. The doctor even noted that the patient was cleared for high-intensity sports. The workday dragged on. Veronica went on autopilot answering calls, signing documents, running meetings, but her mind was elsewhere. By evening, she had a plan. She needed to see just how far her mother-in-law's little game went. At home, Andrew greeted her with his usual smile. Tall, dirty blonde hair, with kind brown eyes. This was the man Veronica had fallen in love with 5 years ago. Back then, he seemed like the ideal man. Caring, reliable, and deeply loving toward his mother. Now, that last trait was beginning to seriously irritate her. "Mom called," he said, heating up dinner. "Her back is killing her again. I was thinking of going over on Saturday to help her carry some boxes up from her basement storage. Maybe it's better to hire some movers on TaskRabbit," Veronica suggested. "Why should you break your back?" Andrew looked at her in surprise. "She's my mother. I'm not going to hire strangers when I can help her myself." Veronica stayed quiet. For now, on Saturday morning, while Andrew drove to his mother's, Veronica decided to do a little investigating of her own. She knew that Nancy usually went to a hair salon on Saturdays, which was located right next to a high-end fitness center. Out of sheer curiosity, Veronica drove over there. What she saw exceeded all her expectations. Nancy Miller, the very same woman who supposedly couldn't lift a tea kettle, was vigorously running on a treadmill. Her pace was impressive, her breathing steady. After the treadmill, her mother-in-law moved over to the free weights. Veronica watched from the window of a coffee shop across the street, unable to believe her own eyes. The woman who had been complaining about a bad back and a weak heart for 2 years was effortlessly lifting dumbbells and doing squats. And she clearly wasn't a beginner. Her movements were confident, and her form was perfect. When Andrew returned home, he looked exhausted. His shirt was dirty, and sweat glistened on his forehead. "How is your mom doing?" Veronica asked, trying to sound indifferent. "Terrible. She can barely stand on her feet. I carried all her storage boxes, plus dragged a huge bag of potting soil up the stairs. She was so grateful she even cried." Veronica pressed her lips together. The theatrical performance was still going strong, and Andrew believed it with all his heart. On Sunday, she and her husband went to visit his Aunt Linda. Over coffee, the conversation turned to health. "How is Nancy doing?" Aunt Linda asked. "Things are bad," Andrew sighed. "Her back is torturing her. The doctors can't really figure it out." "That's strange," Linda drawled. "I just saw her at the gym last week. She was working out so intensely, people half her age would be jealous." Andrew's head snapped up. "You must have made a mistake. Mom can't even walk to the grocery store without losing her breath." "No, it was definitely her. We even said hello. She told me she's been going for 6 months and is thrilled with the results." Veronica watched her husband's face with intense interest. A shadow of doubt crossed his features, but he quickly composed himself. She probably just had a good day. You know how it is with these illnesses, good days and bad days. After the visit to his aunt's, Veronica was completely convinced she was living in a web of lies. Nancy wasn't just healthy. She led an incredibly active lifestyle, and she had been deceiving the entire family for months. But why? What was the point of this whole comedy? The answer came unexpectedly. On Monday evening, Veronica was sorting through some old files and stumbled upon the bank statements for their joint checking account over the last year. She rarely checked their shared expenses, trusting her husband entirely, but now she decided to scrutinize every single line. What she found made her sit down heavily. Over the last 8 months, Andrew had been regularly withdrawing large sums of cash, $200, $300, sometimes $500 at a time. The memos on the transfers read, "Meds for mom, private specialist, treatments." Veronica quickly calculated the total, almost $5,000. $5,000 spent on treatments for an absolutely healthy woman who was secretly doing CrossFit. Her hands shook as she shuffled the papers. So, it wasn't just her health that was a lie. Nancy was straight up stealing from their family under the guise of being a helpless, sick old woman, and Andrew hadn't even bothered to show his wife where their joint savings were going. That evening at dinner, Veronica tried to delicately bring up their finances. "Andy, how much did we spend on your mom's medications this month?" "I don't remember exactly. Maybe 300 or 400. Why?" "Just curious. Maybe we should find a cheaper doctor or see what Medicare covers." Andrew frowned. "Ronnie, she is my mother. I am not going to penny pinch when it comes to her health. We have enough money." "We have," Veronica repeated to herself. She wondered if he still considered it their money when he was spending it behind her back on his mother's imaginary illnesses. The next day, she couldn't take it anymore and called the clinic that had issued the medical certificate. She introduced herself as Nancy's daughter and asked about the test results. "Your mother is in phenomenal shape," the receptionist happily reported. The doctor was even surprised. Those kinds of vitals are rare for her age. By the way, she was asking if she was cleared for downhill skiing. "Downhill skiing?" Veronica echoed. "Yes, she's planning a trip to a ski resort. The doctor cleared her, just recommended she take an instructor for her first few days." After that call, Veronica fully realized that her family was living in a meticulously crafted illusion. Nancy wasn't just playing sick. She was planning an active vacation, using the money she scammed out of her son for medical treatments. But the most unpleasant discovery was still ahead. On Wednesday evening, while Andrew was taking a shower, a notification popped up on his phone. The screen lit up, and Veronica reflexively glanced at it. It was a text from his mother. "Son, don't forget to stop by the travel agency tomorrow. I already picked out the Aspen package. I'm just short on cash. I need you to transfer another $1,500. Veronica felt her blood run cold. Andrew knew. He knew exactly about his mother's plans to go skiing in Aspen. He knew, and he kept his mouth shut. Moreover, he was fully prepared to fund her trip, while continuing to lie to his wife about severe illnesses. When her husband stepped out of the bathroom, Veronica silently handed him the phone. "What is this?" he asked, not even looking at the screen. "Read it yourself." Andrew looked at the text, and his face shifted. First surprise, then confusion, and finally something resembling anger. "Are you going through my phone?" "Andrew, your mother is going to Aspen to ski, using our money that she extorts from us by pretending to be dying. So what? She has the right to take a vacation. She worked her whole life. Let her enjoy herself now." Veronica couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So you knew? You knew she was perfectly healthy, and you kept quiet." "She's not perfectly healthy. She's just feeling a bit better and decided to take a trip." "Andrew, I saw the medical report from the clinic. Your mother is 100% healthy. I saw her lifting weights at the gym. Your aunt saw her there too. Stop lying." Andrew sat on the edge of the bed and let out a heavy sigh. "Fine. Yes, I know Mom isn't as sick as she claims, but she's a lonely woman. She needs attention. If we don't take care of her, who will? Taking care of her is one thing, but lying and stealing money is something completely different. We aren't struggling. We could have afforded to help her honestly, not under the guise of fake diseases. Do you realize we've spent $5,000 on her little theatrical performances?" Andrew looked up, surprised. $5,000? Where did you get that number? Veronica pulled out the printed bank statements. Andrew silently studied the numbers, his face growing paler with every line. "I didn't think it was that much," he muttered quietly. "Well, your mother thought about it. She thought about it and planned it, and you helped her without even bothering to calculate what it was costing our family." Andrew stood up and walked to the window. "Ronnie, she's my mother, the only one I have. I can't just say no to her. Even when she lies and steals, she doesn't steal. She just wants to live a nice life." That phrase was the final straw for Veronica. The husband she loved, the man she thought was honest, was justifying deceit and theft simply because it was his mother doing it. He was willing to lie to his own wife, drain their joint savings, and turn a blind eye to fraud. Veronica couldn't sleep that night. Andrew was snoring peacefully beside her while she stared at the ceiling, realizing her life was built on a foundation of lies. The husband she trusted had betrayed that trust. The mother-in-law she had genuinely pitied had cynically exploited her empathy. But the most terrifying part wasn't the deceit itself. It was the realization that Andrew considered this behavior acceptable. To him, his mother's whims were more important than honesty in his marriage. By morning, Veronica had made a decision. She wasn't going to throw a tantrum or demand explanations. Not yet. But now she knew the truth about her family, and that truth fundamentally changed her outlook on everything. During breakfast, Andrew acted like nothing was wrong. He kissed her goodbye, asked about her plans for the day, and promised to pick up groceries on the way home. But Veronica looked at him through different eyes. Sitting across from her was a man who lied effortlessly whenever it benefited his mother. A man who didn't see the need to discuss major financial drains with his wife. As she left for work, Veronica knew for sure her marriage was hanging by a thread. And it wasn't just about the money spent on fake illnesses. It was Andrew's fault he chose deception over an honest conversation, and he placed his mother's spoiled demands above his wife's trust. But Veronica wasn't the type of woman to throw hysterics or make rash decisions. She always preferred to think things through before acting. Right now, she needed time to figure out what to do with this revelation. One thing she knew for certain: she would not allow herself to be played for a fool any longer. If Andrew thought he could keep lying to her face for his mother's sake, he was dead wrong. The game had just begun, and from now on, she would be making the rules. Over the next 2 weeks, Veronica observed the situation with the cold detachment of a scientist. Andrew continued his regular visits to his mother, returning each time with new, tragic tales of her deteriorating condition. Nancy, according to him, could barely get out of bed, and the doctors were insisting on expensive new treatments. Meanwhile, Veronica spotted her mother-in-law in the most unexpected places. At the shopping mall, vigorously hauling heavy designer shopping bags. In the park, power walking with weights. At the theater, animatedly discussing the play with her friends during intermission. Every time she witnessed these scenes, Veronica felt not anger, but a strange, morbid curiosity. Just how far was Nancy willing to take this charade? And more importantly, just how blind was Andrew willing to be? She got the answer to the second question on a Saturday morning. Her husband was getting ready to drive his mother to the hospital for an IV drip. "Maybe I should come with you?" Veronica offered. Andrew hesitated. "Better not. Mom hates having an audience when she's weak. She gets embarrassed." Veronica nodded and walked him to the door. An hour later, she drove to the suburb where Nancy lived. Just as she expected, there was no hospital visit on her mother-in-law's agenda. Nancy was standing at the bus stop with a large gym duffel, clearly heading somewhere. Veronica trailed her. The bus dropped Nancy off at a luxurious country club and spa outside the city limits. She spent 4 hours there, swimming laps in the pool and using the weight room. Afterward, she went to the club's salon for a manicure and a massage. Nancy returned home by evening, looking refreshed and radiant. Andrew came home exhausted and depressed, spinning tales about how painful the procedures had been for his mother and how bravely she endured the suffering. On Sunday, during a family dinner at Veronica's parents' house, the topic of relative health came up again. "How is Nancy doing?" Veronica's mother asked. "Terrible." Andrew sighed heavily. "The doctors say her condition is critical. We might have to admit her to inpatient care." Veronica's dad, Michael, a physician with 30 years of experience, perked up. "What exactly is wrong with her? What's the diagnosis?" "Her back, her heart, a lot of things. You know how it is at her age." "That's odd," Michael said, furrowing his brow. "I bumped into her at O'Hare Airport the day before yesterday. She was lugging heavy suitcases around, didn't ask anyone for help. I figured maybe she was flying to a specialized clinic, but she looked incredibly spry." Andrew's head jerked up. "At the airport? You must have made a mistake, Michael. My mom can't even leave the house." "No, it was definitely her. We even chatted for a minute. She said she was flying to Miami for a week because a friend invited her." Veronica studied her husband's face. It cycled through disbelief, doubt, and then anger, but not at his mother. At his father-in-law. It must have been someone who looked like her. Andrew stubbornly repeated. The car ride home was completely silent. It wasn't until they pulled into their parking garage that her husband finally spoke. "Your dad made a mistake. My dad has known your mother for 15 years, Andy. I highly doubt he'd mix her up with someone else. Maybe she just had a good day. People with these conditions have periods of remission." Veronica let out a tired sigh. Andrew was willing to invent any excuse imaginable rather than admit the obvious truth. The following week, an event occurred that completely shattered the illusion. Veronica received a notice in the mail from the IRS. According to their records, she owed back taxes on income generated from a consulting business. The problem was, Veronica had never owned or operated a consulting business. She called the IRS and got the details. It turned out that 6 months ago, an LLC providing consulting services had been registered in her name. The business's revenue over the last few months was roughly $30,000. Veronica requested copies of all the filing documents via email. Upon reviewing them, she saw that the signature on the LLC application looked striking. She went down to the county clerk's office where the LLC was registered. An employee managed to pull up the security footage from that day. On the screen, Veronica saw a woman in her 60s submitting the registration paperwork. The woman's face was obscured. She sat with her back to the camera, but the voice was unmistakably familiar. "My daughter-in-law is very sick, so she asked me to file these for her," the woman's voice said. "Here is the power of attorney and her ID copies." The power of attorney was forged. The ID copies were stolen, but the clerk had only done a basic check and pushed the LLC registration through. Veronica printed a copy of the documents and secured a copy of the video. Now, she had ironclad proof that Nancy wasn't just playing sick for vacation money. She was committing identity theft and corporate fraud using her daughter-in-law's name. There was only one thing left to find out. What exactly were these consulting services, and where did the $30,000 come from? That evening, when Andrew left for the gym, Veronica called the company listed as the primary client of her fraudulent LLC. She introduced herself as an IRS auditor and inquired about the nature of the services provided. Nancy Miller consulted for us on family psychology, the manager explained. We run empowerment seminars for women. She was a guest lecturer, highly popular speaker, always a sold-out crowd. And what were the lectures about? How to control men through their weaknesses. How to force your adult son to support you financially, even if he's married. How to remain the matriarch of the family and prevent the daughter-in-law from taking control. The attendees love it. They say her advice is incredibly effective. Veronica felt the air leave her lungs. Nancy wasn't just scamming her own family. She was teaching other women how to do exactly the same thing. She was making a fortune instructing people on how to manipulate their relatives. And how much was she paid per lecture? $1,000 per speaking gig, plus a percentage of the video recording sales. It's a very high-demand topic, you know. After hanging up, Veronica sat at the kitchen island for a long time, digesting what she had just heard. Her mother-in-law was a professional con artist. Not only was she stealing from her own family, but she was monetizing her tactics. She had used Veronica's stolen identity to register a business and was collecting untaxed income under Veronica's name. This was no longer just a family dispute. This was a federal crime. But the most horrific discovery was yet to come. Veronica decided to run a full check on her credit report. What if Nancy had used her identity for more than just an LLC? Her worst fears were confirmed. 3 separate personal loans had been taken out in Veronica's name across 3 different banks. The total amount was $50,000. All the loans had been initiated in the last 6 months. The funds had been deposited onto a debit card that Veronica had never opened. She immediately went to the bank branches. At every single one, she was shown security footage of the loan origination. A middle-aged woman wearing dark sunglasses and a silk scarf. Her face was hard to make out, but the voice was exactly the same. And the signature was an eerily perfect forgery of Veronica's. One of the loan officers admitted they had been slightly suspicious, but the woman had presented a doctor's note stating she had just undergone eye surgery and was medically required to wear dark sunglasses indoors. The medical note looked incredibly authentic. Now Veronica understood exactly how Nancy afforded country clubs, spas, and luxury vacations. She wasn't just siphoning cash from her son. She was taking out massive loans in her daughter-in-law's name, living the high life on someone else's dime, all while playing the part of a frail, dying old woman. That evening, Andrew came back from the gym in a great mood. He was humming a tune and talking about their plans for the weekend. Veronica was utterly repulsed by his carefree attitude. Either her husband had absolutely no idea about the felonies his mother was committing, or he was pretending he didn't. "Andy, we need to have a serious talk." "About what?" Veronica placed a thick stack of printed documents on the table in front of him. The loan agreements, the LLC registration, the IRS notices, the bank statements. "Your mother took out 3 personal loans in my name totaling $50,000. She registered an LLC using a forged power of attorney. She made $30,000 in income and didn't pay a cent in taxes on it. These are federal crimes, Andrew." Andrew silently stared at the paperwork. With every page he turned, his face grew darker. Maybe there's some kind of mistake? "Andrew, I triple-checked everything. Your mother is a professional fraudster. Not only is she scamming us, but she's teaching other women how to do it and getting paid for it. That's impossible. Mom would never do something like this. Then how do you explain these documents?" Andrew stood up and started pacing the kitchen. Maybe someone is framing her, taking advantage of her trust? Veronica shook her head in exhaustion. "Andrew, I saw the security footage from the banks. It is crystal clear that she took out those loans. Her voice, her mannerisms, I don't believe it. I'm going over there right now to get to the bottom of this." "Fine. Just keep in mind that tomorrow morning, I am filing a police report." Andrew whipped around. "What do you mean a police report? Against my mother?" against the identity thief, who stole my name and put $50,000 of debt on my credit score. Ronnie, this is a family matter. We can't drag the cops into this. A family matter is when relatives argue over who gets grandma's china. When someone commits identity theft and wire fraud to take out loans, that is a felony. Andrew collapsed into a chair and buried his face in his hands. Give me some time. I'll talk to Mom. We will fix this. There is no time. I have 3 days to file a fraud affidavit with the banks, or they are going to take me to court for defaulting on the loans. I'll pay the money back. All $50,000. Andrew, you aren't listening. This isn't just about the money. Your mother committed multiple felonies: forgery, identity theft, tax evasion, bank fraud. She could go to federal prison. I will never allow my mother to go to prison. That sentence was the breaking point. Veronica realized that her husband was fully prepared to shield his mother from facing justice for a severe crime. To him, the toxic family bond outweighed the law, morality, and his own wife's ruined life. So you are taking her side. I am taking the side of my family. And I am not your family. Andrew fell silent. His silence spoke louder than any words ever could. They slept in separate rooms that night. In the morning, Andrew left for his mother's house without saying goodbye. Veronica was left alone with her thoughts, and the mountain of evidence proving her mother-in-law's crimes. By evening, Andrew hadn't returned, wasn't answering calls, and hadn't texted. But Nancy did call. Ronnie, it's me. Nancy, what do you want? Aren't you supposed to be dying in a hospital bed? I was discharged. We need to meet immediately. I don't see the need. This concerns your future. And Andy's future, too. Explain. Not over the phone. Let's meet tonight. Where? At a cafe near my house. 7 o'clock. Veronica wanted to refuse, but her curiosity won out. Fine, but this is the last time we speak. Of course, darling. The very last time. All day, Veronica thought about the upcoming meeting. What excuses could Nancy possibly invent? What cards did she have left to play? By evening, she prepared thoroughly. She turned on the voice recorder app on her phone, packed all the documents proving the fraud, and even texted her friend Melissa exactly where she was going. Nancy met her at the cafe looking absolutely fabulous. She had a fresh blowout, expensive designer clothes, and a flawless manicure. There was zero trace of the agonizing illness she constantly whined to her son about. Ronnie, darling, I understand you're upset. I am not upset. I am furious. You're misunderstanding the situation. I wasn't doing this for myself. I did it all for the family. For the family? You took out 50 grand in loans in my name for the family? Nancy sighed, adopting a look of profound martyrdom. Andy is such a sweet, generous boy. He would give me his last dollar, but I didn't want to be a burden to him. So, I figured out a way to earn my own money. By committing fraud? What fraud? I help people. I teach women how to stand up for their rights in their marriages. By stealing my identity. Nancy paused, then lowered her voice. You have to understand, at my age, it's practically impossible to register an LLC or get a business loan. And you weren't using your pristine credit score anyway. It wasn't bothering me. Now the IRS is coming after me for taxes on income I never saw. So you'll pay the taxes. You and Andy make plenty of money. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Nancy genuinely believed she had the inherent right to use other people's identities and money. And what were the bank loans for? To scale the business, marketing, renting seminar halls. I'll pay it all back. When? When I turn a profit. And if you don't turn a profit, who is stuck with the bill? Nancy shrugged. Well, you and Andy. Like I said, you have good salaries. Veronica stood up from the table. Tomorrow morning, I am handing my file to the police. Wait. Nancy jumped up and grabbed her arm. I'm offering you a deal. What deal? I will pay back every cent and dissolve the LLC. And you keep the police out of it. Do you have $50,000 in cash right now? No, but I'll get it. How? Nancy hesitated. I'll borrow it from friends. What friends have $50,000 lying around? Well, some of the attendees at my seminars. A lot of them are very wealthy housewives. Veronica shook her head. There is no deal. I'm going to the precinct tomorrow. Then you will lose your husband. The threat hit like a slap in the face. What exactly do you mean by that? Andy will never forgive you if his mother goes to federal prison because of you. He will leave you. Then, let him leave. Nancy clearly hadn't expected that answer. Do you not love your husband? I love him, but not enough to act as an accessory to a felony. Her mother-in-law sank back into her chair, calculating. All right. And what if I make sure Andrew is the one who files for divorce? Will you drop the charges then? What kind of nonsense is this? If he realizes that you are a greedy, vindictive woman willing to lock up his mother over some money, he'll end the marriage himself. Veronica let out a sharp laugh. Try it. Oh, I will. In that moment, Veronica realized she was in for a brutal war. Nancy had no intention of surrendering. She was willing to use every weapon in her arsenal to avoid prison, including deliberately destroying her own son's marriage. But Veronica was no longer the naive woman who trusted and forgave. The game Nancy started was now going to be played by Veronica's rules. She returned home completely resolute. Andrew still hadn't shown up. He had evidently stayed at his mother's. Good, she thought. That makes things easier. Veronica pulled out all the documents she had gathered. She placed them into a thick manila folder and wrote Miller, N. Fraud, in thick black marker on the front. Tomorrow, she was handing this directly to a detective. What happened to her marriage afterward was up to fate. But first, she needed to secure herself financially. Veronica opened her mobile banking app. Her joint account with Andrew held a very substantial sum. She immediately wired exactly half of it into a brand new, private account she had opened at Chase. Let Andrew figure out where the money went later. Then, she changed all her online passwords, froze all their joint credit cards, and filed an online block on her credit report, adding a fraud alert stating she had never issued a power of attorney to anyone. By midnight, she was geared up for the war her mother-in-law had declared. Tomorrow morning, the police. Afternoon, a divorce lawyer. Evening, a confrontation with Andrew, if he even bothered to show up. But she made her most crucial move right then and there. Veronica pulled her personal debit card out of her wallet and stared at it. This was the card Nancy most likely used for her ATM withdrawals when she needed cash. This was the account Nancy had access to, through Andrew. It was time to sever that pipeline permanently. Veronica logged into her banking app and changed the PIN code on the card. Now, absolutely no one had access to her money except her. Let them try to borrow without asking now. The game was over. The war had begun. Andrew didn't come home for 4 days. Veronica filed the police report, met with her lawyer, and officially initiated divorce proceedings. Life fell into a strange, surreal routine. She went to work, handled legal paperwork, and met up with friends as if she had never had a husband. The only reminder of his existence were the relentless phone calls from Nancy. Her mother-in-law alternated between threatening her, begging her, and trying to negotiate. Veronica either gave one-word answers or let it go straight to voicemail. On Friday morning, a detective called to inform her that a formal criminal investigation for fraud and identity theft had been opened. Nancy Miller was being called in for questioning. 2 hours after that call, Veronica's phone began blowing up with calls from her husband. She didn't answer, but she turned on an auto-call recording app, just in case. By evening, Andrew finally showed up. Or rather, she saw his car parked outside their building when she got back from work. Walking up the stairs, she braced herself for an ugly confrontation. But Andrew wasn't in the apartment. However, someone had clearly been there. Several items were out of place. The first thing she checked was the safe in the bedroom. The lock was intact, but there were scratch marks around the keyhole someone had tried to pry it open. Inside the safe were the apartment deed, some jewelry, and a stack of emergency cash. Everything was untouched. Then, Veronica noticed her backup phone was missing an old iPhone she kept in a drawer for work trips. Some papers had also vanished from her desk, specifically copies of her W-2s and older bank statements. The picture was crystal clear. Andrew had broken in to dig up intel on her finances. He was probably hoping that during the divorce, he could claim a massive chunk of her assets. Veronica smirked. Her husband really didn't know her at all if he thought she would leave sensitive documents lying around. The originals had been sitting in a bank safety deposit box for days. On Saturday, she decided to deep clean the apartment, throwing out anything that reminded her of Andrew. She rearranged the furniture to create a new space for a new life. During the purge, she noticed more things missing. All the framed family photos of them together were gone. The USB drive with their wedding video was missing, along with the birthday gifts she had given him over the years. Andrew was clearly preparing for a permanent split, confiscating the physical memories of their life as if trying to erase her from his history. By evening, the apartment was transformed. It no longer looked like their shared home. It looked entirely like hers. Sunday passed peacefully. Veronica met up with her parents and broke the news about the divorce. Her father took it philosophically. If it didn't work out, it didn't work out. Her mother was more upset, but entirely supportive of her daughter's decision. On Monday morning, while getting ready for work, Veronica had a strange premonition. The day was going to be rough. Her intuition didn't fail her. At 11 a.m., right in the middle of a meeting with contractors, the receptionist peeked into the boardroom. "Miss Miller, your husband is here. He's insisting he needs to see you immediately." Veronica excused herself and stepped out into the lobby. Andrew was pacing near the front desk. He looked awful, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, bloodshot eyes. He had clearly had a rough weekend. "We need to talk," he demanded, skipping the greeting. "We can talk through our lawyers. I'm working." "Ronnie, please." 5 minutes. She checked her watch. The meeting could wait a few minutes. Fine, but exactly 5 minutes. She led him into a small glass conference room. Andrew sat across from her and stared in silence for a few seconds, struggling to find the words. "Mom is in the hospital," he finally blurted out. "What happened?" "Hypertensive crisis." After the police called her in for questioning, her blood pressure spiked to a critical level. "The doctors say her condition is severe." Veronica shrugged coldly. "I'm sorry to hear that, but it doesn't change the facts of the case." "Doesn't change the facts?" Andrew exploded. "You drove a sick old woman into the hospital, a sick old woman who does CrossFit and charges money to teach seminars on how to defraud relatives." Andrew went quiet, then lowered his voice. "Fine. Let's say Mom was wrong, but she didn't do it out of malice. She just wanted to be independent, to not be a burden to us. By taking out $50,000 in debt under my name, she says she was going to pay it all back before you ever found out. Andrew, your mother is a career criminal. She makes money teaching other women to do exactly what she does. This wasn't an accident. It was a premeditated racket." Her husband looked down at the table. "What do you want? What will it take for you to drop the charges?" "Nothing. The charges stay." "Then why are we even talking?" "Good question. Why are we?" Andrew stood up and walked over to the glass wall. "I thought we could come to an agreement, find a compromise." "What compromise do you make with identity theft?" "Mom is ready to pay the money back." "Does she have 50 grand sitting in her checking account?" "No, but she'll get it." "Where?" "From the women at her seminars?" Andrew whipped around. "What's wrong with that? People are willing to help her." Veronica shook her head slowly. Her husband still couldn't grasp the sheer insanity of the situation. "Andrew, your mother is going to beg for cash from women she trained to be fraudsters. They are going to hand her money they stole from their own families, using her methods. And that doesn't bother you. All that matters is the debt gets cleared. What about the tax evasion, the forgery, the stolen identity?" Andrew sat back down. "So you refuse to meet us halfway?" "I refuse. And you know why? Because your mother committed a string of federal felonies. And you, instead of holding her accountable, are desperately searching for loopholes to keep her out of jail. She is your mother. But I was your wife. I can still be your husband. Ronnie, let's try to save our marriage. We loved each other. We did. Right up until you decided a con artist's convenience was more important than your vows." Andrew stared at her for a long minute. Then, his tone shifted entirely. It grew cold and hard. "Fine. You win. Mom will face the music. And what happens next? We get divorced." We're already getting divorced. And you think you're going to have a great life all by yourself. There was a distinct, menacing edge to his voice. Andrew, what are you implying? Nothing. Just wondering how you plan to live from now on. A single, 30-something woman with a reputation for throwing her own mother-in-law in a jail cell. Veronica stood up. This conversation is over. I'm asking you to leave my office. I'm not finished. But security is. Guards, please escort this man out. Andrew stood up but didn't move toward the door. You are going to regret this decision. Probably. But not nearly as much as I'd regret staying married to you. After Andrew was escorted out, Veronica had trouble focusing on her work. Something in his final words put her on high alert. Andrew wasn't the type to throw around empty threats. That evening, she decided to drive to her friend Melissa's house to blow off some steam. Melissa lived in a neighboring suburb, and Veronica knew the route by heart. But as she was parallel parking near Melissa's condo, she spotted a familiar vehicle. Andrew was sitting in his car about 50 yards away. When Veronica stepped out, he started his engine and slowly drove past her. She pretended not to notice she was being tailed. She went up to Melissa's, stayed for 2 hours, and came back down. Andrew's car was still parked down the block. On the drive home, Andrew followed her at a distance, never getting too close, but never dropping out of sight. Veronica parked in her building's garage and went inside. Glancing out the hallway window, she saw him park across the street, effectively standing guard. She checked the window several times during the night. The car never moved. He was tracking her movements. By morning, the car was gone. But that didn't mean the stalking was over. He had probably just changed tactics. The workday passed without incident. But when Veronica walked out of her office building, Andrew wasn't waiting in the plaza. Instead, there was a piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. Meet me at home. We need to settle the financial split. There was no signature, but Veronica would recognize Andrew's handwriting anywhere. She drove home cautiously, taking several detours to ensure she wasn't being followed. The street outside her building was quiet, but the moment she walked into her apartment, she knew someone had been inside. There was a faint scent of cheap cologne, and items were slightly shifted. On the kitchen counter lay a manila envelope. Inside was a printed bank statement from her new, private Chase account, the one where she had transferred her half of the joint funds. The final balance was circled in red ink. Andrew had somehow bypassed her security to spy on her private finances. He likely used her old login credentials or the stolen documents to impersonate her and gain access. Veronica immediately called Chase, locked down every account, and ordered a complete security overhaul. Then, she called a locksmith to change the deadbolts on her front door. Andrew was done playing by the rules. The next morning, she woke up to her phone ringing. The caller ID showed her mother-in-law's name. Ronnie, it's me. Nancy. What do you want? Shouldn't you be in the ICU? I checked myself out. We urgently need to meet. I don't see any reason to. It's about your future. And Andy's. Say it now. Not over the phone. Let's meet tonight. Where? At my apartment, 7 p.m. Veronica wanted to hang up, but her curiosity flared again. Fine. But this is the absolute last time. Of course, darling. The last time. All day, Veronica mentally prepared for the showdown. What new angle was Nancy going to try? What ace was up her sleeve? By evening, she was ready. She turned on the voice recorder app, tucked her folder of evidence into her tote bag, and texted Melissa exactly where she was going. Nancy opened the door wearing casual loungewear, but her hair was perfectly coiffed, and her makeup was flawless. She looked absolutely nothing like a woman who had just survived a hypertensive crisis. Come in, Ronnie. Do you want some tea? No, thanks. Let's cut to the chase. They sat in the living room. Nancy studied her daughter-in-law for a moment before speaking. You've changed a lot recently. In what way? You've gotten harder, more calculating. You used to be so soft, so compliant. I didn't know who I was dealing with back then. Nancy smirked. Well then, let's lay our cards on the table. You want to see me in a prison cell? You put yourself in a prison cell the second you committed identity theft. Fine, let's say you win. What do you actually get out of this? Satisfaction? A sense of justice? I get my life back. And you lose your husband forever. I already lost him. Nancy leaned forward. Did you? What if I told you Andy is ready to come back to you? Under what conditions? Under the condition that you drop the police report. Veronica shook her head. No, I won't even entertain that. Just listen. Nancy stood up and walked over to the window. Andrew is devastated about the divorce. He realizes he was wrong to hide my issues from you. He is ready to beg for your forgiveness, to change, and what is required of me. Forget everything that happened. Give us a chance to make it right. And the money? The $50,000 in loans? I will pay back every single cent. When? Within a year. And the guarantee? Nancy paused. You have my word. Veronica let out a harsh laugh. The word of a con artist? Seriously. Her mother-in-law's face darkened. All right. Let's do this the hard way. She walked back toward her armchair, but didn't sit down. If you do not withdraw that police report, you will lose a lot more than just a husband. What else could I possibly lose? Your job, for starters. Veronica stiffened. What do you mean? I have connections at your construction firm, and I think they'd find it very interesting to hear that their marketing director is currently suing her own family over money disputes. They might start thinking you're volatile, litigious, unreliable. Are you blackmailing me? I am simply informing you of potential consequences. Veronica stood up. This conversation is over. Wait. I'm not finished. I have no interest in your threats. Nancy stepped sideways, blocking the path to the front door. You think you're so smart. You think you calculated every angle. Get out of my way. Not quite. The mother-in-law reached over to the side table and picked up her phone. Andy? Yes, she's here. No, she won't negotiate. Come up. Veronica realized she had walked into a trap. The meeting was a setup. Nancy had lured her here specifically to stage an ambush with her son. I am leaving. No, you are going to wait for Andrew. He has a few things to say to you. A few minutes later, a key turned in the lock. Nancy went to open it, while Veronica stood in the hallway, calculating her options. Andrew walked in and froze when he saw his wife. A whirlwind of emotions crossed his face. Anger, resentment, and a deep exhaustion. Hey, he said flatly. Hey. Nancy quickly locked the deadbolt and slipped the key into her pocket. Now we can talk calmly, without any witnesses. Veronica felt a spike of adrenaline. The situation was spiraling out of control. Give me the key. I am leaving. Nobody is going anywhere until we solve these problems. Andrew walked past them and slumped onto the sofa. He looked even worse than he had at the office. Ronnie, sit down. We need to talk. About what? About our marriage. About the money. About Mom. Veronica remained standing. Speak. Andrew let out a heavy sigh. I know you're furious with me, and with Mom, but we are a family. You can't just throw everything away so easily. I can when the family is built on wire fraud and lies. Mom isn't going to hide anything anymore, she promised. Nancy nodded vigorously. Everything will be totally transparent from now on. And who is going to pay off the bank loans? We'll handle it together, Andrew said. We both have good salaries. I have a good salary. Your mother has zero legal income. Enough, Andrew erupted. How long are you going to keep beating a dead horse? As long as it takes to get justice. Andrew jumped up and started pacing. Justice. Justice. Where was your sense of justice when you unilaterally transferred all the cash out of our joint account? You protected your own interests and robbed your family. What family? A con artist and her accomplice. Andrew couldn't tolerate those words. He spun around, his eyes blazing with fury. Shut your mouth. Don't you dare talk about my mother like that. I will talk about the facts. The facts? Is it a fact that you intentionally orchestrated this whole thing? You changed the PIN on your card just so Mom couldn't get cash for her treatments. Veronica was taken aback. What PIN? What are you talking about? Nancy interjected, her voice dripping with venom. Don't play dumb, darling. Andy told me you have a debit card that I use for family emergencies, and you purposefully changed the PIN code to torture a sick old woman. Veronica gasped in outrage. I never gave anyone permission to withdraw money from my cards. We are family, Nancy continued silkily. And if I occasionally took a few small amounts for absolute necessities, that is completely normal. You were stealing! I was helping myself in a difficult moment. And you, out of pure spite, took that away from me. Andrew was feeding off his mother's words, his rage boiling over. So you really did change the PIN, on purpose? Of course I did it on purpose. So thieves couldn't steal my paycheck. Thieves! Andrew roared, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. At that exact moment, Nancy's phone rang. She answered it and put it on speakerphone. Son, your idiot wife changed the PIN on her debit card. Now I can't even buy a new cabinet for my house, the voice shrieked through the speaker. It was a recording. It was Nancy herself, repeating the exact words she had screamed at her son over the phone an hour ago to summon him here. Except now, she was playing it right in front of Veronica's face, deliberately stoking the fire. Andrew lunged forward, his face contorted with absolute rage. You really did that? You completely cut my sick mother off from buying her basic necessities. Your mother is as healthy as an ox, and she is stealing my money. Shut up. Andrew lunged at his wife and pulled his arm back. Veronica dodged, backing up against the wall. Andrew, stop. Give me the PIN code. Right now. Never. He swung again, and this time his fist connected. The blow struck her hard on the shoulder. Veronica cried out in shock and fell to her knees. The PIN code! Andrew screamed, raising his fist to strike again. But Veronica was not the kind of woman to sit and take a beating. She scrambled to her feet, drove her knee upward, and slammed it directly into her husband's stomach. Andrew doubled over, gasping for air. Have you lost your mind? Veronica screamed. You're hitting your wife? Andrew straightened up, panting heavily. You're not my wife. You're a snake destroying my family. I am defending myself from criminals. He lunged at her again, but Veronica was ready. As he reached to grab her arms, she drove her knee up a second time, connecting brutally with his groin. Andrew stumbled backward, clutching himself, groaning in agony. You! Crazy! He wheezed. Nancy, who had been watching the brawl unfold, decided it was time to intervene. Andy, calm down. This isn't how we agreed to do this. She won't listen, he gasped. Then we will make her listen. Her mother-in-law walked over to a side table and pulled something metallic out of the drawer. Veronica's blood ran cold as she saw the large kitchen knife in Nancy's hand. What are you doing? I am facilitating a family discussion, Nancy said with eerie calm. Sit down, Ronnie, and no sudden movements. Andrew forced himself to stand upright, his eyes widening at the weapon. Mom, what are you doing? What I have to do to survive? If she takes me to court, I'll get 5 years in federal prison. At my age, that's a death sentence. But a knife? It's just for persuasion. Ronnie is going to realize it's in her best interest to drop the charges voluntarily. Veronica slowly backed toward the window, assessing the room. 2 against 1. The door was locked. The enemy had a deadly weapon. But she was not going to surrender. You are committing another felony, Veronica said, her voice remarkably steady. Armed coercion and assault. And who is going to know? Nancy sneered. We are going to come to a quiet little agreement. No, we aren't. Oh, yes, we are. Andy, call 911. Tell them your wife had a mental breakdown, threatened my life, and you had to defend your mother. I will corroborate everything. Andrew stared at his mother in sheer panic. Mom, I can't do that. You can and you will. Choose her or me. Veronica knew the situation was critical. She had to act before they could execute their plan. She faked a sudden dart toward the kitchen. Nancy lunged to block her, slashing the knife through the air. In that split second, Veronica grabbed a heavy crystal vase off the coffee table and hurled it directly at her mother-in-law's chest. Nancy stumbled backward with a shriek, dropping the knife. Capitalizing on the chaos, Veronica tackled Nancy, shoved a hand into her cardigan pocket, and ripped the keys out. She scrambled to the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt. Behind her, Andrew was screaming, "Grab her! Don't let her get out!" But it was too late. Veronica threw the door open, slammed it behind her, and sprinted down the hallway. She took the stairs 3 at a time. She didn't stop running until she was locked inside her car. Her hands were shaking violently as she started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. Only when she was miles away, merged safely onto the highway, did the sheer horror of what had just happened crash over her. Her husband had beaten her. Her mother-in-law had pulled a knife on her. They had plotted to frame her for attempted murder, just to force her to drop identity theft charges. Veronica drove straight to the nearest Chicago Police Department precinct. The desk sergeant listened to her frantic story and immediately called for a detective. She filed a formal report for assault, battery, armed coercion, and extortion. A precinct medic photographed and documented the massive, blooming bruise on her shoulder where Andrew's fist had struck her. "Do you need police protection?" the detective asked. "I don't know yet, but I'll take it." They issued her a direct emergency contact line and assured her the suspects would be brought in for questioning at dawn. Veronica didn't go home. She checked into a hotel downtown, locking the deadbolt and sliding the chain into place. Every footstep in the hallway made her jump. By morning, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't live in the same city as these people anymore. She needed a clean break. At work, her CEO was incredibly understanding of the crisis and authorized her to work fully remote while the legal battles played out. Her colleagues were stunned. The news that calm, professional Veronica Miller was currently pressing federal charges against her scam artist mother-in-law was the gossip of the year. By lunchtime, the detective called. Andrew Miller and Nancy Miller had been arrested and were currently in holding. "Do you want to be present for a mediated confrontation?" the detective asked. "Absolutely." Walking into the precinct, Veronica felt safe for the first time in days. Andrew and Nancy were sitting in separate interrogation rooms. Both of them looked drastically less confident than they had the night before. The confrontation with her husband was tense. Andrew immediately tried to deny the assault, but the medical report and the photographs of the fist-shaped bruise were irrefutable. "She fell on her own," he insisted desperately. "I never hit my wife." "Then how do you explain a contusion consistent with blunt force trauma from a human knuckle?" the detective asked dryly. Andrew remained silent. "Do you have witnesses?" "My mother will confirm my story." "Your mother is a co-conspirator. Her testimony is compromised." When the detective formally laid out the charges: aggravated battery, domestic violence, and coercion, Andrew finally broke. "I didn't want to hit her. I just lost my temper. Mom told me that Ronnie purposely changed her PIN code to starve a sick woman to death." "And did you bother to verify if your mother was actually sick?" the detective asked. Andrew hesitated. "She complained about her health constantly. We subpoenaed the medical records from every clinic she visited. Her diagnosis? 100% perfectly healthy. Furthermore, she is a member of an elite fitness club." Andrew's face went slack. "That's impossible. It's fact. Also, your mother fraudulently gained access to your wife's debit card and routinely stole money from it. She also took out 3 personal loans and registered an LLC under her name. The total financial damage exceeds $85,000. Andrew lowered his head. "I didn't know about the loans, but I knew she was using the debit card. Mom said Ronnie gave her permission." Veronica Miller categorically denies that. In fact, she changed the PIN code specifically to stop the unauthorized theft of her funds. "So, it appears your mother has been lying to you." "So, she lied to me too?" "She lied to you. She lied to her daughter-in-law, and she lied to the federal government." After Andrew's interrogation, the detective invited Veronica into his office. "Your husband is confessing. He admits to the assault, claiming temporary emotional distress, but your mother-in-law, Nancy Miller, is stonewalling. She claims she took the money with your verbal consent, and she adamantly denies pulling a knife on you." "I have an audio recording," Veronica said. She pulled out her phone and played the file she had secretly recorded during the ambush. The detective listened to the entire recording. "This is gold. With this evidence, the prosecution is going to have a field day." "What about my husband?" "Assault and battery will likely get him probation, community service, and mandatory anger management. But the armed coercion with a deadly weapon? That carries serious weight. Up to 5 years. Veronica nodded. She felt no joy that Andrew was facing a criminal record, but she felt no pity either. He had made his choice. A few months later, the trial concluded. Nancy Miller struck a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence and was handed a 3-year suspended sentence with 5 years of strict probation for wire fraud and identity theft. Andrew received 1 year of community service and was ordered to pay his wife restitution for emotional damages. Most importantly, a judge ruled that all the loans taken out in Veronica's name were fraudulent. The banks were forced to wipe the debts from her credit report and absorb the losses. The divorce was finalized a month after the trial. Veronica kept the apartment, her car, and her entire half of the joint savings. Andrew didn't even try to contest the division of assets. His public defender likely advised him that playing hardball would end disastrously. At the final court hearing, he tried to approach her one last time in the hallway. "Ronnie, I just wanted to apologize." Apology accepted. "But an explanation isn't necessary. I understand everything now. I swear to God, I didn't know about the loans. Mom told me you said she could use the card for emergencies. Andrew, you chose to believe your mother over your wife. That tells me everything I need to know." He looked down at his shoes. "Is there any chance that in the future, we could?" "No, absolutely not." "Why?" Veronica looked her ex-husband dead in the eyes. "Because you raised your fist to me. That crosses a boundary that can never be uncrossed. I would never do it again. Andrew, you hit me because you were demanding money for your con artist mother. If it happened once, it will happen again." He opened his mouth to argue, but Veronica was already walking away. 6 months after the divorce, Veronica sold her Chicago condo and moved across the country to Seattle. She accepted a lucrative offer at a top-tier consulting firm and rented a gorgeous, spacious apartment in a modern neighborhood. Her new life began with a completely blank slate. No reminders of the past, no familiar faces, no pitying questions about why her marriage failed. The first few months were lonely. Veronica was used to the routine of married life, and coming home to an empty apartment was a psychological hurdle. But slowly, she adapted. She threw herself into her career. Her new colleagues were fantastic, and several of them became close friends. She found new hobbies. She enrolled in French classes, started practicing yoga, and immersed herself in Seattle's vibrant theater scene. Men occasionally showed interest, but she deflected any serious advances. After such a traumatic, violent divorce, she just wanted to be alone, to figure out who she was and what she truly wanted out of life. A year later, she received a text from Melissa back in Chicago. Melissa said Andrew had shown up at her office a few times, practically begging for Veronica's new address. Naturally, Melissa had told him to drop dead. 6 months after that, news reached her that Nancy Miller had violated the terms of her probation. She had been caught running a Medicare scam on several elderly neighbors in her complex. The judge revoked her probation, and Nancy was sent to a federal correctional facility to serve out her original sentence. Veronica received the news with complete indifference. Her past life felt like a movie she had watched a long time ago about completely different people. In Seattle, no one knew her backstory. To the world, she was just a highly successful, independent woman who prioritized her career over domestic life. And that suited her perfectly. Sometimes, in quieter moments, Veronica wondered how things might have played out. What if Andrew had been honest with her from the beginning about his mother's demands? What if he had taken her side when she uncovered the fraud? What if he hadn't raised his fist? But those thoughts evaporated quickly. The past couldn't be changed, and the future depended solely on her. 3 years after moving to Seattle, Veronica was promoted to regional director. She now managed a team of 50 people, controlled a multi-million-dollar budget, and was on track for international assignments. Her personal life had finally stabilized, too. She met a man who was easy to be around, intelligent, and grounded. Stephen was a pediatric surgeon, divorced, and co-parenting a teenage daughter. Their relationship developed slowly, organically, and completely free of drama, exactly what Veronica needed. One evening, over dinner at a waterfront restaurant, Stephen gently asked about her previous marriage. Will you ever tell me what happened with your first husband? Veronica set her fork down and looked out at the water. He turned out to be someone completely different than who I thought he was. He lied, he stole, and in the critical moment, he chose a criminal over me. Stephen nodded slowly. I understand. I went through something similar with my ex-wife. Only she chose a hedge fund manager's bank account. And what did you do? The same thing you did. I walked away and never looked back. That conversation was a major milestone in their relationship. They realized they shared the same scars and the same core values. 2 years later, they got married. A quiet ceremony at the courthouse, a beautiful dinner with their closest friends, and a 3-week honeymoon in Europe. No massive, stressful banquet, and absolutely no relatives with questionable criminal records. Stephen's daughter embraced Veronica warmly. The girl was smart and independent. She didn't need a replacement mother, but she genuinely enjoyed Veronica's presence in their family. Her life was beautifully assembled. Her career was deeply fulfilling and highly lucrative. Her new family was strong and harmonious. Her friends were loyal. Her health was excellent. Occasionally, Veronica would think about what would have happened if she had stayed with Andrew. If she had forgiven the mother-in-law's fraud, turned a blind eye to her husband's betrayal, and agreed to live in a house built on lies just to save the marriage. The scams would have undoubtedly continued. Nancy would have felt completely invincible, inventing newer, more destructive ways to drain their finances. Andrew would have kept lying to protect her. Sooner or later, it would have resulted in absolute financial ruin, or even worse, criminal charges that dragged Veronica down with them. And worst of all, Veronica would have lost all respect for herself. She would have turned into one of those miserable women who tolerate endless humiliation for the sake of a fake, toxic stability. No. She had done the right thing. She was harsh, but she was just. She defended herself, ensured the guilty were punished, and rebuilt her life from the ashes. It wasn't an easy path. She had to survive a violent assault, a messy divorce, criminal trials, and relocating across the country. But the result was worth every single tear. Now, 5 years after the fateful day, she found that medical report in the mailbox. Veronica Bennett could say with absolute certainty, she was happy. She had a career she loved, a husband she trusted implicitly, a great relationship with her stepdaughter, and total financial independence. And somewhere in Chicago lived her ex-husband, Andrew. Did he have a job? Was he married again? Did he visit his mother behind bars? Veronica didn't know, and she didn't care to know. That story ended for her the exact second the judge slammed the gavel on her divorce. Everything else was a new life, one with no room for past mistakes or regrets. The only thing she ever pondered was how many women tolerate identical situations, terrified to change their lives. Terrified of being alone, terrified of being judged, terrified of the unknown. And they shouldn't be. Being alone is vastly superior to keeping bad company. The judgment of strangers is never worth sacrificing your own peace of mind, and the unknown is almost always better than a familiar, but utterly unacceptable, present. Veronica Bennett knew this as a concrete fact, because she had walked through the fire and didn't regret a single decision she had made. Her first marriage was a brutal, but vital, lesson. A lesson that trust must be earned every single day. That family bonds do not justify felonies, and that sometimes the hardest decision is the only correct one. And one more very important lesson: never, ever underestimate a quiet, patient woman, because when her patience finally runs out, the consequences are spectacularly devastating for anyone who thought they could take advantage of her kindness. Veronica never let anyone deceive her again, and she lived happily ever after, but only with the people who actually deserved it. Life in the Federal Correctional Institution, FCI, in Greenville, Illinois, was a stark contrast to the luxurious country clubs and upscale spas Nancy Miller used to frequent. The beige cinder block walls, the harsh fluorescent lighting, and the rigid schedule left no room for manipulation or theatrical performances. When Nancy first arrived to serve her sentence for Medicare fraud, she had tried to play her usual games. She attempted to manipulate the younger inmates, offering them life advice and trying to position herself as a matriarchal figure. She even tried feigning severe heart palpitations to get transferred to the medical wing, where the beds were softer and the food was slightly better. But the federal prison system was entirely immune to Nancy's charms. The medical staff saw right through her fake hyperventilation, noting her vitals were perfectly stable, and sent her straight back to the general population with a warning. The other inmates, hardened women serving time for serious offenses, had zero patience for a former suburban housewife trying to run psychological seminars in the rec room. After a few weeks of being entirely shunned, the reality of her situation finally crushed her. Without her expensive blowouts, tailored clothes, and manicures, Nancy aged rapidly. Her hair grew out in wiry gray patches, and her posture, once proudly maintained through expensive Pilates classes, hunched under the weight of her prison-issued khaki uniform. Her days were now spent mopping the linoleum floors of the cafeteria, a bitter irony for a woman who had once refused to lift a tea kettle. 200 miles north, in a cramped, dingy studio apartment in the Chicago suburbs, Andrew Miller was facing his own bleak reality. The domestic violence and coercion charges on his record had completely torpedoed his career. When his previous employer ran a routine background check update and discovered the convictions, he was quietly let go. Finding corporate work with an assault record proved nearly impossible. He was forced to take a job as an assistant manager at a discount auto parts store, working grueling 50-hour weeks just to make rent and pay off the court-ordered restitution he still owed Veronica. His social life was non-existent. The few mutual friends he and Veronica had shared cut ties with him the moment the details of the trial became public. Whenever he tried to date, the women inevitably Googled him or asked why his marriage ended. Once they found out he had assaulted his wife to protect his mother's identity theft ring, they blocked his number and never looked back. Once a month, Andrew made the miserable 3-hour drive down to FCI Greenville to visit his mother. The visits were never pleasant. They sat across from each other in the sterile visitation room, separated by a thick pane of plexiglass. "Andy, you need to talk to a lawyer about an early release," Nancy hissed through the phone receiver during one of his visits. "The food here is practically poison. My arthritis is acting up, and the guards don't care at all. You have to get me out of here." Andrew looked at the woman sitting across from him. He saw the sharp, calculating eyes that had deceived him for years. He thought about the house he used to own, the successful wife he used to have, and the comfortable life he had thrown away to protect her lies. "I can't afford a lawyer, Mom," Andrew said, his voice completely hollow. "I make $18 an hour. Half of my paycheck goes to paying off the restitution for the loans you took out in Ronnie's name." "Well, ask for a promotion, or take out a loan," Nancy demanded, her old entitlement flaring up. "I am your mother. You are supposed to take care of me." Andrew slowly hung up the receiver. He didn't say goodbye. He just stood up, turned his back on the glass, and walked out of the visitation room while Nancy frantically banged on the partition. Driving back to Chicago in the pouring rain, Andrew finally admitted the devastating truth to himself. Veronica had been right about everything. His mother was a parasite, and he had destroyed his own life to be her host. He decided right then and there that he would never make the drive to Greenville again. Meanwhile, in Seattle, the rain was falling gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Veronica's downtown office. She sat at her mahogany desk, sipping a hot latte, reviewing the quarterly projections for the Pacific Northwest region. The firm was breaking revenue records, and her promotion to vice president of marketing was practically guaranteed by the end of the fiscal year. Her assistant, a bright young woman named Chloe, knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Miss Bennett, the mail just came. There's an official letter for you from the Cook County Clerk's office in Illinois." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "Thank you, Chloe. Just leave it on the desk." When she was alone, Veronica picked up the thick envelope and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a formal legal document and a cashier's check. It was the final, court-ordered restitution payment from Andrew. The debt was officially settled. The last legal tie to her nightmare in Chicago had been completely severed. She looked at the check. It was for a little over $2,000, the final installment. A faint smile touched her lips. She didn't need the money. Her salary was more than enough to afford a luxurious life. Veronica picked up her pen, endorsed the back of the check, and filled out a deposit slip. She wasn't going to put it in her own account. Instead, she routed the funds directly to a Seattle-based nonprofit organization that provided legal aid and emergency housing for victims of domestic abuse and financial coercion. It felt like the perfect, poetic closure. That evening, Veronica drove home to her beautiful house in the Seattle suburbs. As she pulled into the driveway, she could see the warm, golden light spilling from the kitchen windows. When she walked through the front door, the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary filled the air. Stephen was at the stove, wearing an apron over his dress shirt, tossing a pan of vegetables. His teenage daughter, Maya, was sitting at the kitchen island, furiously typing away on her laptop for a high school history paper. "Hey, you," Stephen said, turning around to give her a kiss. "How was your day?" "Productive," Veronica smiled, wrapping her arms around his waist, and completely drama-free. "The best kind of day," he agreed, handing her a glass of red wine. "Hey, Veronica," Maya chimed in, without looking up from her screen. "Can you proofread this conclusion for me later? My history teacher is a brutal grader." "Of course, sweetie. Print it out and leave it on my desk." Veronica leaned against the kitchen counter, taking a sip of her wine, and watched her family. There were no hidden agendas here. No fake illnesses, no stolen identities, no secret bank accounts, and no raised fists. Just a quiet, genuine love built on mutual respect and absolute honesty. She thought back to the woman she had been 5 years ago, the naive, accommodating wife who exhausted herself trying to please a manipulative mother-in-law. That woman was gone, forged in the fire of betrayal into someone unbreakable. She had lost a toxic marriage, but she had won the world. And as Stephen handed her a plate of dinner, and Maya laughed at a joke he made, Veronica Bennett knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single thing about the journey that brought her exactly here.